Hi, I'm Alex Garcia, and thanks for joining us here at NTWC Live. It is a team effort between Bill Reed, Tim Smith, and I. We'd like to say thank you to a few groups that helped make this possible. It's USAA, South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau, the Weather Company, and the Weather Boy. And now, here's Tim Smith.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to NTWC Live for Wednesday, May the 25th, just 1 week out from the beginning of the 2022 hurricane season. Here we are again, getting ready to get things going as we head into the hurricane season. It's time to get ready. The forecast is out, so we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. I've got a full program for you today, so we hope you'll stay with us through the hour. A couple of different guests going to talk about a couple of different things, and we'll get to that in just a second. As always, we want to thank the folks who make this program a possibility once again as we head into the 2022 hurricane season. USAA, thank you for all that you do to make this work. The South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, a big part of what we do. Of course, that's the host city for the National Tropical Weather Conference, has been for 10 years now, and we've already scheduling and planning for 2023. So start making plans now to join us in South Padre Island next year. Walmart, once again, a sponsor of what we do, and we appreciate everything Walmart does for us. The Weather Company, a big part of broadcast meteorologists all across the country. We appreciate that. Black Magic Design, the city of Brownsville, thank you for all you do as well to make this a possibility. So here we are 1 week out from the start of the 2022 hurricane season, and we had our first interesting area earlier this week that amounted to nothing. But Bill Reed is here to talk to us about what is out there now and what we may have to deal with the next few days. Good morning, Bill.
Morning, everybody. Tim, how are you doing? And yeah, we're getting these big MCSs driving off the Gulf Coast on the North Gulf Coast. Remnant thing called an MCV gets left behind on that, and they tend to have characteristics that have great look-alike or something tropical. And anytime we get something over the Gulf, people get nervous about what they are. And every now and then a real storm forms out of those. Alicia in '83 came out of an MCV. But that's the past. I'm here to talk about the future, or the present, really. How's the share looking, Tim?
Looking good.
Okay. This is current satellite loop over the tropical Atlantic, Caribbean, and most of the Gulf of Mexico. Much quieter than it's been as far as thunderstorm activity. It's suppressed well to the south with strong westerlies and dry air being the dominant feature in most of the basin. With that being the case, this is no surprise. Hurricane Center's 5-day outlook is no new tropical cyclones in the tropical Atlantic. A little different over in the Eastern Pacific. If you recall, the 15th of May is the official start of the East Pac hurricane season, and right on cue, we've started to get clusters of convection. One out here they were thinking about a little while ago, one farther out, but they're not doing anything. The 2 points of interest are area showing a little sign of circulation and some convection southwest of Mexico, and this larger area of convection that's just south of the Gulf of Tehuantepec off southern Mexico and Central America. The outlooks accordingly, as of early this morning, fairly low probability on the one out to the west. It's got hostile conditions approaching it, so it doesn't have a very large window to develop much, so they're holding it at a 20%. This other one is well, it's jumping around on me. I'm going to just leave it alone. Forecast to move west-northwestward and develop. We give it a 30% chance in the next 48 hours and a much higher chance, now up to 80% of developing off the coast. And I thought I'd just show you, they're not running at least they weren't when I last looked, running any tracker models yet. So I'll just run you through a little bit of what's in this case, the European model picks it up. First sign of a low starts showing up consistently, really on the weekend by Saturday, and it develops it rather rapidly and becomes a small but intense tropical cyclone. It drags it northward into Mexico early next week, and then pops a redevelopment out in the Bay of Campeche by the middle of next week. All of this is deterministic and speculative this far out in time, but just to give you a flavor of what the models are thinking. And through its 10-day forecast, keeps a broad low pressure down in the southern Gulf of Mexico. GFS, for a change, is in a similar mode to the ECMWF. It starts a little earlier. We start seeing a persistent circulation Friday. And again, just like the ECMWF, the conditions are right, the hottest water and no shear, and it's off to the races, becomes a hurricane before also making landfall in southern Mexico, dumping copious rainfall in that area, and then moving back out over the Bay of Campeche, and it develops it, keeps it kind of over land, a kind of a broad circulation over the Yucatan down in the northern Central America. And I don't go any farther than that. That becomes Fantasy Island and Model Cane, so I'm not going to go there with this. So that's where we're at early in this tropical season. Got a lot of us on board today. I'll stop the share. Here we are. And in addition to the usual suspects, the three of us, we have Hal Needham, our storm surge and other interesting weather phenomena guru, who's parked down in Galveston, Mark Suddeth, who's our remote sensing innovator that operates out of Wilmington, North Carolina. And looks like that's where you are today, Mark, correct? Very good. Okay, our first speaker for the day is Lucas McDonald. Lucas is the Director of Emergency Operations for Walmart, and he's based out of their headquarters in Arkansas. And he's bragging to us today about the nice 50-degree weather, and he's wearing a sweater vest to prove it while the rest of us are in full summer mode. Well, good morning and welcome to our show, Lucas.
Good morning. Really appreciate you all having an interest in what we do here at Walmart and having me on. And I need to update, last check, it was 62 degrees, so it's getting warm out there.
Yeah, you're going to have to shed the vest. There you go. Well, I guess we could start. Why don't you give us like just a quick synopsis of what emergency management at Walmart means. Most of us are more familiar with the public emergency management of our counties and cities.
Yeah, you know, it's really not that much different. We have an EOC, we have an emergency operations center, we have ESFs, so emergency support functions. And what we do is the same thing that anybody else does. When there's a crisis happening, we bring people together to respond. And we have experts across the company that jump into our EOC, and those experts are associate, relations. So the people team, we have merchandising, we have legal, we have transportation, supply chain, pretty much any aspect of the business comes together into our EOC to respond to whatever that might be. A lot of times it's hurricanes. Really, even before I joined the company, Walmart got a lot of attention for the response to Hurricane Katrina, and really we became known for responding to hurricanes. But since then, it's been a lot of other things as well. Obviously, we were key in the COVID response, the civil unrest, pretty much anything that's impacting our associates, our operations, we're jumping in and responding here. And I think an important note, I say the EOC now is a physical thing and a virtual thing. Just like everybody else, we've had to learn how to do this virtually. So we have kind of a hybrid EOC, and the EOC is now more the responders than it is the physical building.
Fascinating. Do you, just thought of something. Do you by chance have any staff meteorologists?
So we don't have meteorologist positions, but I have a background in meteorology. I didn't get the degree. I don't call myself a meteorologist because I chose the lucrative world of weekend TV weather over differential equations and calculus. And so I never call myself a Met, but I spent a lot of time at St. Louis University studying. And then I do have a meteorologist on my team, Joe Pennington, who he joined us in a emergency manager type role, but he does have the Met degree.
That's good. Yeah. If you said no, I'd be at lobbying your company to have a position. There's all kinds of people interested in taking their knowledge that they're gaining in school and applying it in the private sector now. So I'm always looking for opportunities for kids coming up in the program.
I'm seeing a lot of students that are going after both a MET degree and emergency management to combine them. And so I do get a lot of calls from folks that are interested in what we do.
Yeah, I've seen, that's new since I retired, but I got a chance to visit Millerville State University, and they have the dual programs are working together there. Very good. Talk about the preparedness end of it. How you guys market the hurricane preparedness products and services that Walmart has, and things like tax-free days and things like that.
Yeah, it's a big deal. The more you can buy in May and June, the better off you'll be especially in August and September, right? So there's a few aspects to what we do. One of them is simply just ensuring that our associates know to be prepared. At Walmart in the U.S., we have well over 1 million associates alone. And if our associates that are in your community are prepared for a hurricane, that's one less, part of the community that you need to worry about preparing. And so internal associate preparedness is big. We partner a lot of times with communities when they have their tax-free days to ensure that we have the right product available that somebody needs to be purchasing, on those days: batteries, flashlights, shelf-stable foods, the things that you can buy ahead of time is a big deal. And then also on our website at walmart.com, you'll see, especially in the time leading up to a predicted hurricane or any other disaster, really, you'll see us shift things around a little bit to try to promote what we think will be helpful to get people through that disaster.
That's cool. That's a interesting approach. We're obviously in the tropical end, so let me run you a little scenario, and you can describe how you would operate going forward on that. We have a tropical wave entering the Gulf of Mexico, and it forms into a depression. Not the Gulf, in the Caribbean, and it forms into a depression somewhere southeast of Puerto Rico. And the 5-day forecast has it moved into the Gulf, but not yet a pinpoint on landfall. Why don't you take us from there? It's forecast to become a major hurricane, of how you guys ramp up for something like that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, in that scenario, I lay in bed awake all night thinking through all the scenarios and what I have not accomplished yet, right? We actually have nearly 40 retail facilities in Puerto Rico. And so we are heavily focused on Puerto Rico. Anytime something is getting close, we're already starting our EOC activation calls just to help prepare where we can, the associates and operations there in Puerto Rico. We are like everybody else. We're looking at every possible forecast model run, but we rely really heavily on the National Hurricane Center. And we want, as best we can, we want to use their products to help us make a decision. So if we're looking at a system that, if we're looking past Puerto Rico and we're looking at the potential of a major hurricane getting into the Gulf of Mexico, but really not knowing where it's going yet, we'll look at the ensembles and try to get a sense. But other than that, we're looking at the probabilities from the Ntwc. And in your scenario here, we probably don't have anything that's showing up in probabilities just yet. So we're watching that very closely, because once we have those probabilities, we have a whole bunch of decisions we need to make.
Great. It sounds like you're able to accomplish what you need within the 5-day window when we have confidence in the forecasts.
I wouldn't say accomplish what we need, but we're definitely. I think there's two parts of it. Part one is the panic buy that comes along with whatever the forecast models are saying, right? And that's the part that we struggle to keep up with on the 5 days. What we can do, though, within a 5-day window is use the probabilities to make a decision on where do we need to send a generator to a place, a refrigerated trailer to a place. Where do we need to start preparing for power outages? That we can do within 5 days based on the probabilities. I think I've been here 15 years. Many of that time, many times we're making a decision off of this is what I remember, or, I remember having long power outages here or whatever. I would like to get away from that. I would like to be making decisions on, the probabilities coming from the NHC. We're expecting winds over 58 miles per hour here. So in these locations, we've got a 40% or 50% probability. Let's put our generator there or a refrigerated trailer there, because that's where we have the highest confidence in a power outage or something significant happening. I focus on generators so much because that's what allows us to hold the perishable items at temperature in that store. So when the hurricane passes, we have milk that we can sell that's still been at the right temperature the whole time. Otherwise, we're going to have to start over, and that takes a whole lot of time to do. So the more food that we can save, the faster we'll get back to that community.
I guess it's economically for you guys, it makes more sense to bring a temporary generator in rather than have a permanently installed generator at the facility.
Boy, those are expensive.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, especially when you're looking at the amount of refrigeration that we're trying to run off of one gen. Okay.
Now the other question I had that on the operations side that I'm sure is a tough one to constantly keep up with is now you have a direct hit somewhere. Let's take Laura, for example, hitting in Lake Charles. Do you send other employees in from elsewhere to help relieve the people that have to deal with their own personal damages and whatnot in the community at the Walmarts?
Yeah, we do. I think, if you can imagine your home or your neighbor's home being destroyed by a hurricane, then having to go back to work, right? Your mind is there helping your family. So we do, and we try to do it from a region that has that experience so they know how to support. Most recently, we did that. I know we're outside of hurricanes, but most recently we did that in Mayfield, Kentucky, after the tornadoes went through there in December, to bring other associates in to help run the store. And then the teams that were assigned to that store, they're either taking care of their families or they may be back at the store, but taking care of the associates and just the kind of the family needs there, as opposed to trying to make sure the registers are running.
Wow. How long does it take to return your store's operation to normal, say after like a Hurricane Laura?
Yeah, after Ida, we had everybody back up and running except for the 3 that were hit the hardest within 11 days from the identification from the naming of the storm. So when we knew we had a risk there, from our first EOC call to getting everything back up was just a few days. Typically, if you look at Laura, I think within 3 days, we had all but one back up and running. We can usually do that pretty quickly. Now, back up and running means that, we may not have everything that a customer might be looking for, but we're taking care of the community from pharmacy, food, those key items that people are really looking for in a time of disaster. We have to kind of choose, and we'll work with the community leaders. For example, back during Hurricane Ike, we had a specific request to get that Galveston store back open for the workers coming back onto the island. And so we really kind of stopped everything else to focus on getting that store there in Galveston back up and running as quickly as possible. And so we'll do that as the community request.
Yeah, I remember on that exact same issue. I think from my experience, it seems like the private sector and the government's working together on keeping the systems working and prioritizing what comes up first in the community has greatly improved the community's ability to deal with the response with the least amount of interruption and the required stuff they need. It's fascinating to hear how you plan that out.
It's come a long way. Even back to Gustav and Ike, and we did run into some problems, just trying to work together with the states at that time. And frankly, I know many of you all are in Texas, I remember being on the EOC calls with Jack Colley, and what a presence he was and what a voice he was. But I don't think at the time the states really understood what it is that we could offer. And there were times where I think there was, I don't remember the name, maybe Michael, that was headed into the valley, and then eventually I think went farther south. But there was contraflow set up, and then we had a request to deliver all these truckloads of water into the valley, but with the contraflow, we couldn't get them in, right? And so it's just working with the states. You can't take the interstates and turn them all one way and then have us, try to get trucks in there. And so the partnerships are so much better now with the states. In fact, for the last several hurricanes in Louisiana, we've sent somebody from our team here in Bentonville to sit in the State Emergency Operations Center. We've been in Texas, we've been in Florida, we've been in North Carolina, South Carolina. A lot of these states have opened their doors to us and other private sector partners so we can sit in the room and work together on solving some of these problems.
Yeah, that's Jack Colley's legacy. And he picked up on that from the 04 season when there were hurricanes hitting Florida like crazy. And before he had enacted it, we got to 05 and the Rita debacle. And I think that got everybody moving to get the job done the way it is.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, what and the rest of our guests, we got any questions for Lucas?
We do have one that has come in online from Casper. Just wants to know, Lucas, with the big rainfall events in the Northeast, some from Ida, some from other things, did those flash flooding events change the preparation approach from the company at all? Were there lessons learned from that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that always happens is you get so focused in on what's happening in, at the landfall point, right? Especially with Ida. We have done a lot since then to work with basically, so we have a partnership with Esri, which is a mapping platform that most folks are familiar with. And we pull anything and everything we can from the National Weather Service into there. So we pull the WPC and we look at the QPF and we look at the excessive rain. And then we plot out the stores that have that risk of seeing excessive rainfall. And then we've set up a process within our own ESFs, our own emergency support functions, to notify those stores or those Sam's Clubs in that area of that risk of flash flooding. We also will deploy a Tiger Dam to a location if it's flooded in the past, and we want to try to prevent that. That's hard. You need several days notice. It's not something you can do for flash flooding, more for river flooding. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. We're pulling in every bit of data we can to automate that decision-making process to say, hey, this facility looks like it's going to get 6 inches of rain. We need to do these things.
I have visions of trucks loaded with supplies, whether it's a hurricane or a flood event of any kind. Just trucks loaded with supplies, all they're running, ready to go in the minute that they can get in. Is that an accurate portrayal? I mean, are they just ready to roll on a moment's notice?
I'll tell you what. A couple of years ago, I was I took a family vacation. I was on a cruise ship for at the time Tropical Storm Barry. It turned briefly into Hurricane Barry, I believe. As it made landfall in Louisiana, and trying to drive home I passed dozens of Walmart trucks that were full. I was on PTO, right? I'm on vacation. But it was such a great feeling to see all these trucks just headed down in that direction. You're right. There's a lot that happens behind the scenes. It's deciding what merchandise you're going to send, what stores it's going to go to, what DCs it's coming from. But as soon as possible, we'll have those trucks lined up and running.
We've been talking obviously about big events, but before the show started, we talked about, obviously we're the day after the tragedy in Uvalde. But that's one of your towns as well. And you've got associates there. Talk a little bit about how even small events like that, and it's not small, but small local events like that still impact what you guys do.
Yeah. If it happens, there's probably a Walmart nearby. And if there's not, we probably have associates that are connected there. And so with that awful tragedy yesterday, we had associates that, were impacted. And so what we do is, try to assess what we can do for those associates. And yesterday, briefly, the decision was made to close that store because we know that that's what the associates needed. They needed to not think about working, and they needed to be with their families. And so if something happens across the nation or even across the globe, we have to look at what it is and what we should be doing to support that community. My team here at the Emergency Operations Center takes about 300 calls a day from stores and clubs across the country. And many times it's a power outage, or maybe it's a raccoon that wandered into the garden center, right? But there's also other things that do happen. And so the EOC here will stand up to support whatever it is that we need to.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. It's on a company that size, 1 million associates. You said that it's 1 million, but it comes down to the one when something's needed for the one. That's amazing. And Mark said with Hal Needham, if you guys want to join this, if you guys have any questions, by all means, jump in. I see you.
Thank you, Lucas. This is Hal Needham. I'm in Galveston, Texas. I really appreciated your presentation. I had a question for you. What does it look like coming back the day after the storm? You know, if there's storm damage, maybe damage to the roof from the winds, maybe an area was flooded out. I know a lot of residential people will come back home. They'll start that process of taking photos, submitting insurance things. And sometimes what comes up, they submit flood insurance and their flood insurance says, no, this was wind damage first. You know, submit that to your homeowners. Then they submit that to their homeowners and homeowner says, no, this goes to FEMA. This was a flood. And sometimes the two sides will battle it out and it comes up to, was it wind damage first or flood damage first? Do y'all have the same type of issues commercially? And then if so, you know, do you document what happened, like with any security cameras, anything like that? Like forensically, how do you start that process the day after the storm?
Yeah, you know, to kind of walk you through, and somebody just yell at me if I'm talking too much here. We're like everybody else here in our EOC, both physically and virtually. We are watching, you know, every radar sweep. We're watching Mark and what he's doing. We're watching everybody else and every social media feed that's possible to get a sense of what's happening. And in the first few hours, a lot of what we get comes from somebody that's driving around town with their camera on. And that's the first look at the store we're getting. Back to Hurricane Michael. There was someone that was driving down, through Panama City, and we saw a Walmart trailer that was overturned. And that's how we first were notified about it, is watching it on social media. Thankfully, the driver wasn't there and no one hurt. But the first few hours, it's just gathering every piece of data we can. And then after that, once it's safe, we start to see people showing up to our store. So a store manager might be able to get to the store because they live across the street. You know, we're not getting anybody in from 10 or 12 hours away yet, but we're getting someone in pretty quickly. And they have a kind of an initial damage assessment that they do from the outside to look at it to make sure the store is safe. And then once they've cleared that, then they can step inside and look as well to see what may have happened. And a lot of times it's just a rooftop unit from air conditioning that's been turned over, or it may be something more significant. But they're gathering all of that, feeding that here into our EOC, and then we're just kind of making a decision. These stores are the ones that are really going to need the most help. We're going to send everything we have to Galliano because that's where we have the most damage. Or we're going to look at New Orleans, and we know that this is a huge community. May not be a lot of damage after Ida, but we have power outages. So we need every generator we can to go to New Orleans to get the power back up and running.
Thank you.
All fascinating information, Lucas, and we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about it this morning, because I think a lot of us see, again, the community EOCs, but we don't realize how important what you guys do is, and it's happening at your company and companies all across the country. So we appreciate that. I think we're ready to switch gears a little bit here, if everybody's good with that. And everybody stay with us, please, because we want to keep this conversation going. But switch gears a little bit to the hurricane forecast, the seasonal forecast. Of course, back in April at the National Tropical Weather Conference, Dr. Klotzbach issued his forecast, and he of course worked with Dr. Gray, who was a pioneer in the seasonal forecasting, and now forecasts are being issued by anybody that wants to, and there's a lot of them, but one of the most important ones is NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. Their forecast came out yesterday, and Alex, I would believe that we have that. So if it's queued up, let's take a look at what NOAA said yesterday for the seasonal forecast.
Probability of the following ranges: 14 to 21 named storms with top winds of at least 39 miles per hour. Of these, 6 to 10 will become hurricanes with top winds of at least 74 miles per hour. Of these, 3 to 6 major hurricanes ranked as categories 3, 4, or 5 with top winds of at least 111 miles per hour. Let me say a word about the accuracy of the forecasting and how NOAA's forecasts have improved in recent years to better predict storms and protect life and property throughout the hurricane season. Since the year 2000, we've seen a 57% improvement in the average 72-hour National Hurricane Center track error in the Atlantic Basin. This can be attributed in part to NOAA's flagship weather model, the Global Forecast System, incorporating things like dropsondes and hurricane hunter flight data into its analysis. Our improved track forecast has allowed us to more accurately pinpoint the area most at risk, which reduces the size of areas that may need to evacuate when a hurricane threatens. This improvement is illustrated in the National Hurricane Center's track forecast cone, also known as the cone of uncertainty, which represents the probable track of the center of a tropical cyclone up to 5 days out. The cone of uncertainty has gotten significantly smaller since 2005. We've also seen improvements in our intensity forecast. Forecasters can now more accurately predict changes to hurricane intensity early in a storm's life cycle. The National Hurricane Center's average intensity error is now 40% lower than it was in 2000. Looking ahead, NOAA will triple our operational supercomputing capacity for weather and climate this summer.
So there you have it. I don't think there's any surprise in that forecast in terms of the actual forecast itself. I think the interesting information there is that the forecast has gotten so much better. That's good and bad. People expect better, and then when you're off a little bit, we have problems. And Bill, let's go back to you first and kind of take over. But basically what Dr. Phil said back in April, NOAA says the same, and most of the forecasts all say the same thing.
Yeah, I haven't found anybody that has a contrary forecast to an active season. And the trend in the most important factor that's driving this is the status of ENSO, and the trend in the oceanography forecast has been trending more and more towards a stronger La Nina than what we were anticipating, say, 6 months ago. Now, that's typical. It's primary reason NOAA waits till after the May ocean forecast to issue their seasonal one is that the forecasting of ENSO is least accurate in the February and March and April timeframe. So it starts to improve as you get in. It's like anything, you get closer to the event you're trying to forecast, you should be getting better at it. And also noteworthy is they don't give you any wrongful clues about where somebody might get hit. There may be some people that think they can forecast that, but I haven't seen any studies that show much accuracy in that. But it should be helpful. I mean, the fact that everybody's on the same page and the reasoning behind it sounds the same should be a great tool for those that are in emergency management and in weather to try to encourage people to get prepared big time this year.
Right. And I want to hear from all three of the guests about how the seasonal forecast impacts what you do, because I think that's really important. And does it or does it not? And let's go back and we'll start with Lucas. And Lucas, jump in. Does that above average seasonal forecast change your workload as we go into the next few months?
I think one, unfortunately, our teams have had so much experience with responding over the last 2 seasons that they have a lot of good expertise there. And so if this were the first busy forecasted season, we would be all over saying, hey, let's train, let's exercise, and let's pull that out of the playbook there. But they know what they're doing. It does impact us as we look at some commodities, bottled water, flashlights, batteries, how much we're going to pre-position. And we don't know where, but we know that the hurricane's probably not going to hit Portland, Oregon, right? So we know that we're going to put everything between Texas and New York or Maine and have it ready there. So yeah, a lot of work does go off the seasonal forecast. Also, a Walmart associate is like anybody else. They're very interested in every possible forecast they can get their hands on. I always tell people that it seems like a bad forecast is better than no forecast. Because that's what people want is they want something to be able to print off and look at. And so, yeah, we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
Hal Needham, you've traveled up and down the coast following these storms, getting in front of them. Talk a little bit about how a seasonal forecast impacts you as you get ready and ramp up for the season.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Even in April and May, already communities in these flood-prone areas, you can tell in a seasonal forecast that's really enhanced, or when we're expecting an active season, there's a lot of interest in hurricane preparedness presentations and what we can do to partner with communities. I do a lot of communication as well through videos, podcasts, and I think that's really ramped up, especially like April, May, and June when we're expecting that really active season. Once we get into the season, I think every year, people are just looking week by week at the models, but there is a lot of interest. We do forecasting of the three major hazards, strong winds, saltwater storm surge, and heavy rainfall as well. I think in general, there's more of an interest in our products, both from the public and the private sector, as well as we get into hurricane season when we're expecting a lot of activity.
Thanks, Alan. The great Mark Sutter this there. Unmute Mark, and we haven't gotten to you yet, and we appreciate you waiting quietly in your box in the corner there, because we appreciate your input in this as well, because you're deploying equipment out in front of these things, and when you hear it's going to be an active season, what does that mean to you?
Be sure we're ready as we can be, with more equipment, more technology to put out there. I want to show you something. I want to share my screen going back to the NOAA updates and the CSU updates here. This is a couple of graphics that one of our back-end gurus has put together, this young man up near Chicago, Tim Melman. A couple of really interesting infographics. The NOAA forecast going back to 2008. And notice these last several years, talking about ENSO, why was 2015 so low? And then every season since, it's basically been up since, 2019 was a little bit of a down year for the forecast, but it still ended up that we had more than forecast. But the trend, this could be the 7th year, that we have seen above normal activity. And that's the NOAA. This is the Colorado State. Same kind of thing. It's been up. And that's, not a coincidence. We have not had an El Nino since 2015, and the Atlantic has been dominated by this very strong Western African monsoon, the general overall warming of the Atlantic, the very warm Gulf of Mexico relative to average these last several years. That has all helped to give us these very busy seasons, and we've had some big impacts. We've seen, especially these short fuse storms, Michael and Harvey and Ida, Laura, everything trying to intensify, it seems, these really big events. So, whether it's an active season or an inactive season, I know it's cliche, but it only takes one to ruin your season. It could be Wilmington, North Carolina, where I am, and even up into Bentonville, where Lucas is. The remnants of these systems do go inland far away. We saw that last year with Ida. And impacting the Northeast United States with fatalities and terrifying footage of flooding coming into people's basements. So it's a national problem. I mean, it's something that affects everybody. You think gas prices are annoying now. We get the Golden Triangle. I don't know, Bill's going to wince if I, finish this sentence here, but you get a Cat 4 into the Golden Triangle at the right angle. And Hal, this too. I mean, gas, forget it. It could be a national crippling event. So this is a very serious thing. And we take all of that into consideration when we get ready. And also, and Hal knows this, how you present it to people, that you don't want to be looking like you're happy. Oh, a big hurricane season, I'm going to have some business. It's a very serious thing. And it affects every American, whether they know it or not. And so we look at it from preparing, equipment-wise, but also how to present and communicate with people, that you don't be fearful or overhype it, so to speak. That word hype is always interesting, but that we're ready the best that we can be, but also communicate effectively. And that's why I like programs like this, by the way. 2 thumbs up. Good to be here.
Well, I thank you, Mark. It's all about the message, the message that's conveyed. And I think today does that. It's just another step in that phase.
We've got the science on our side. Right. And science has been under attack, unfortunately, for several years now. That's all I'll say about that. And it's on our side, especially in our field. And we have this gift that we can see these hurricanes coming relatively soon. Yes, we still have the Idas, the Lauras, the Harvey experiences, but I'll take these over an earthquake that maybe your dog is acting a little weird for a few seconds, and then the earthquake hits, any day of the week. So we'll use science and the communication science too to do the best we can, because it looks like it's going to be a very busy season. And look at what Bill Reed was talking about. The Gulf is trying. Look how hard it's trying already. I think the atmosphere is telling us something, and the ocean as well.
Yeah, I use a couple of seasons to illustrate the vagaries of seasonal forecasting and reactions. First on the high side, the busiest season I had at the Hurricane Center was 2010.
Right.
Ain't no landfalls worthy of the name. They were all the big ones were out at sea. We don't have a trouble selling it here in Houston. All I have to do is pull up 1983, where there weren't seasonal forecasts, but there were only 4 named storms. The modern era, the least number of storms we ever had. We had Alicia, major hurricane. And then 1992, 7 storms. It forecast to be a light year. We had Andrew. So the seasonal forecast should not be. I get a little worried when people get real busy with an active forecast, and if we give them a come out next year with a low number of forecasts, whether they'll ease off the gas and say, we're not going to have one this year. It's going to be a quiet year. So you always have to fight that aisle factor in there.
Yeah, it's the hashtag "it only takes one" is something that we see over and over and over again. We all use that, at least, I still use that in presentations to the Lions Club and whatever, because and I think you're right, Bill, in places like Houston and Miami, they understand it. But outside of that, I'm not sure that concept is well grasped yet. I don't know anybody can comment on that. We've got a comment online. This goes back to Lucas and what we were talking about earlier about Walmart's preparedness. I'm kind of going around a little bit, but he said that one of our Walmarts locally installed a generator back during the freeze. He said he appreciates that, making good business sense and good community support during severe weather, whether it's the hurricanes or whatever. So a good comment on what you're doing. Alex, we got another clip, I believe, from the conference yesterday talking about storm surge. And I'd like to look at this and then hear from the guys again, comments about it. So let's look at that. It's from yesterday's presentation, storm surge.
When we talk about evacuations for flooding from hurricanes, we're typically talking about storm surge inundation. And so the flood zones are based on the type of inundation that we can expect and the flooding that we can expect from storm surge, because the majority of fatalities that we see from hurricanes come from storm surge.
All right, so storm surge is one of the biggest killers. And Mark, both Mark and Hal have made a career out of going out and getting in front of that storm surge. Mark, talk about putting cameras in front of those storm surge and some of the things you've seen and how important awareness of storm surge is.
I tell you, ever since I started this career of mine almost 30 years ago now, the concept of storm surge, seeing early videos from people like Jim Leonard that would go out and do it in person with a camera. And I had to do that early in my career. And then as I've gotten older and wiser and we've got the technology, we put these little GoPro cams to record it. We also have the live cams to tell that story. How does storm surge do what it does? Because, we see these movies like Hurricane, I think it was 1974, Larry Hagman was in it. And you get that very bad B-roll footage of like these big waves that are clearly from Hawaii. And that's supposed to be storm surge, to the day after tomorrow that is CGI, industrial light and magic, storm surge sweeping into New York. And they'll say that a storm surge sweeping up the entire eastern seaboard. But when you see it and the different areas that storm surge happens, Topsail Island, North Carolina is going to be different than Galveston Bay, is going to be different than Charleston Harbor and Mexico Beach or Lake Pontchartrain. And so using these cameras to be in all these places at once has really taught us a lot. And I've been very honored to work with the National Hurricane Center to give this footage to them, learn what's happening. We see the forecast verifying in real time. And then you look at the work, incredible work that Hal has done developing this database of all these points around the coastline, and he can speak to it, better to hear it from Hal. But there's a great effort here because storm surge, even though we've made a tremendous advance in keeping people safe from it, it is still the potential to be the #1 killer in hurricanes. From the hurricane impact, storm surge still has, that's the one that should keep everybody up at night. It's not the wind.
And Hal, talk about that, all the data points that you've gone out and created and updated and everything else, and how important that is.
Yeah, I started graduate school in 2008, and there was no comprehensive database for storm surge, even though it's the most deadly and destructive natural hazard. There were data everywhere. There were scientific reports, National Hurricane Center reports, U.S. Army Corps information, FEMA maps. They just never were really put together. So the last 14 years or so, I've been running the U.S. Storm Surge database. Now we have over 9,600 high water marks. We have data, really high water marks for more than 350 tropical cyclones back to 1880. What's the most interesting to me with that is often we see patterns repeating. Storm surge, really depending on the coastal profile and the coastal shape, we see that really affects the patterns that we see. And there's a really geography to coastal flood risk. And so we see a lot of those patterns repeating. Great example last year in Hurricane Ida. Hurricane Ida came in as a major hurricane, making landfall near Grand Isle. It followed a very similar track of the 1915 hurricane. And we have a U.S. Army Corps map showing dozens of high water marks all throughout Southeast Louisiana. What was interesting to me with Ida last year was the western end of Lake Pontchartrain. That was a hot spot in 1915. Mark, you put your camera out there in Frenier Landing right there, and you caught that surge around 10 feet high. That came in and inundated a community called Laplace that I think was unprepared. I talked to a lot of locals that nearly died in the storm surge. They said, we didn't realize that we're in a flood hotspot, but that area would have flooded in 1915. It would have flooded from Hurricane Betsy in 65. It would have flooded in 2012 from Hurricane Isaac. So sometimes we have these historic hotspots, but even locals, a lot of people move to the Gulf Coast from other parts of the country. They might not know the history. They might not know the patterns. And so I like to get out ahead of the storm and kind of warn people what we're expecting, stay out there and document it during the storm. And then after the storm, really, I like to stay out there in the field, document this and add these data to our database so we can better predict floods in the future.
Remarkable and really important information that you guys, the two of you, are gathering with each and every storm, and you're changing the way people respond and react to hurricanes. I think, and Lucas, you can probably comment on that too, because you see what these guys are doing, and it helps you make your decisions.
Yeah, no, fantastic work that you both are doing, and much needed work. I think storm surge is a place where feels a little more vulnerable for us. If we're in an evacuation zone, we're going to evacuate that store. We're going to get the associates, encourage them to evacuate and get everybody out of there. But trying to make a decision on what life-sustaining merchandise we're going to put in what store. We don't want to shove a store full of something, a baby formula and bottled water, if it's simply going to be wiped out by storm surge. And so we really struggle there on understanding, is it going to be a foot, 3 feet, 8 feet? What is the impact to that potential store? In Katrina and Waveland, Mississippi, that store had significant storm surge, and there was really nothing left but just a couple of walls there. And so we're just trying to avoid losing a bunch of life-sustaining merchandise.
Bill, jump back in, because I've been asking questions for a while, but Bill, jump back in on this before we go to the last clip that we have.
Hit the unmute button, that'll help. I think one of the big challenges with storm surge is that it's some of the worst impacts sometimes are disconnected from where the core of the storm goes, especially on the Gulf Coast. And it's just difficult to wrap that around people's heads when they're focused on the eye of the storm, which is in many cases the traditional hotspot for it. Made a lot of headway in ways of visualizing it in the old days without any kind of graphics for it. It was very tough to convince people what we were forecasting.
Well, Bill, I think one of the things that Ken Graham said in his presentation at the National Tropical Weather Conference, and this impacts storm surge so heavily, is that wiggles matter. You're talking about wiggles matter, and a small bend in that track, the 10-mile bend in the track, has a significant impact on where that biggest surge ends up and people's takeaway from the storm.
Yeah, it's a great way to example why we intentionally have a broader brush than what the actual impact will be. That's our best way right now of accounting for uncertainty.
And I don't know, Mark or how you guys, again, put those instruments out there. Talk about how those wiggles matter. When you're trying to predict the storm surge, trying to predict where you're going to put those cameras, where you're going to put your, where you're going to collect data points. A wiggle at 10 miles makes a huge difference. Mark, go ahead.
Yes, we learned that, especially Laura tried to get the equipment to where we'd hopefully catch the core. Of course, a lot of it has to do with whether or not it's going to come in at night versus the daytime. So by the time we got to Ida and, we had more funding, more equipment, we were able to cover a huge area of coastline from Gulfport, Mississippi, all the way down to Golden Meadow and pretty much every point in between. And then, casting that wide net, you're going to catch some fish, to use the analogy. And as Hal mentioned, we were very fortunate from a scientific perspective here to be in the right place at the right time for Laplace and the west end of Lake Pontchartrain. A couple other lucky factors of someone that said we could use their property. Social media comes into play, but it all adds up that, we were able to capture something. And a lot of that video, and that's another thing I want to emphasize, is video is data. Video is data in a lot of ways. And so we've made that very clear in our work that it has a lot of use. And so it's been used as educational through several TV stations down on the Gulf Coast, the National Hurricane Center, FEMA, using these recent clips to show this is what storm surge looks like. We do a lot with augmented reality to show storm surge in a studio, but when you see it for real, it drives the point home as to exactly what's going on with it, how fast it can come up. But it's a challenge because you don't know. Every mile does matter, absolutely. Hal?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. You're exactly right. Storm surge is very localized for sure. So if you move that track 10 or 15 miles, especially near where it's making landfall, you can see a very different flood pattern. That said, what I'm really starting to realize now is that certain areas tend to consistently be hot spots or consistently be low spots. For example, Shell Beach, Louisiana, east of New Orleans, the entire Mississippi coast. If you have a direct hit there, they're going to get a big storm surge. But if that storm track moves 60, 70 miles to the west, you're still going to get a big storm surge because they're really open up on a right angle to the south and east. I mean, you could move that track quite a bit. You're still going to get big surge in that area. Compared to, say, Morgan City, Louisiana, they're really open to the coast to the southwest. Even when Hurricane Andrew made a direct hit there as a major hurricane, the storm surge was only 8 feet. It's just, it's really hard for them. That prolonged east wind, that's onshore in places east of the Mississippi River, but you get to Morgan City, that's a prolonged offshore wind. So geography really matters, and there are certain areas that tend to be hot spots and certain areas that tend to be low spots. I think it's really important for communities to realize that, but also commercial and private sector interests as well to realize some of our stores are always in hot spots. Some of ours tend to be in low spots, but the track does matter, the wiggles matter, and that's why when we see the actual storm track, we definitely need to give a buffer for most areas as well.
Yeah, we worry. We're here, South Padre Island, South Texas, where all of the recent hurricanes, I say all of them, Dolly and Hannah, things in recent memory that people live here that have gone through, have gone in north of the city of South Padre Island. South Padre Island is less than half mile wide. So they've had a storm surge on the back side, on the bay side. So most people that live there have never seen a Gulf side storm surge yet. And I think they're in for me, myself included, are in for an awakening when we get a storm going in near the mouth of the Rio Grande and it pushes a storm surge over an area that hasn't had one in a long time. And that's when, as we talked about at the conference, people are going to say, I've lived here for 40 years and I've never seen this. And those are the scariest words you can ever hear.
Yeah, Tim, that's exactly right. And if you go back far enough in time, you'll eventually see that track. It might be from 80 years ago. It might be from 100 years ago, but eventually you see something really bad that happened. But again, people say, I've lived here 40, 50 years. My area never floods. If you go back farther in time, usually you see that it has flooded.
It's just, our memory and our lifetime is too short compared to history. We've got one more clip I think we want to show. We're about to wrap the show up, but let's show this real quickly because it talks about watches, warnings, and advisories. And let's look at that clip, and then we'll comment on that, and we'll wrap the show up. Alex, take it away.
But we are seeing these storms develop faster. They're developing more frequently. And so it's giving our state and local emergency managers less time to actually warn the public. So they do FEMA does not issue evacuation orders. That comes from the state and the local level, and they have plans that they put in place and how they're going to do that and when they make that decision.
The importance of having a plan. That's what it's all about. Let's go back where we started to Lucas. That's what this whole program has been about, is having a plan, Lucas. And you set the example for, for the corporate world, for your associates, and for everybody, I hope, by what you're doing. And thank you for what you're doing. Talk about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it is important to have a plan. And that's why we have plans. We've exercised them. We've done that already here in May, working with the folks along the coast. Getting ready. And then as you think about a person, a member of the community getting that watch, you want to go to Walmart or you want to go to Lowe's or Home Depot or Target, get what you need. All of us in the corporate world have to be ready to have whatever it is that you need ready in our stores. And we can't wait until that watch comes out. And so there's a lot of work being done now to ensure that we're ready for that community when they need to prepare.
Al, you're ready for the season. You're not waiting until watches and warnings are issued. You're ready to roll.
Yeah, I mean, always already now, almost a couple times a day, looking at the latest model runs. And like we said, the golf seems warm. It seems ready out there. I think we can't wait. We want to be out ahead of these things. So I know right now I'm watching every day.
Mark, obviously you're prepared. You've got your new equipment. You've got stuff ready to go. Your funding's coming in, ready to rock and roll, right?
Yeah, ready as can be. Like Hal said, monitoring stuff, a lot of colleagues, a lot of good, to develop a consensus on what's going to happen, where it might happen, and, working with some great people to make things happen when it's time to go. We're ready.
I want to get Bill's final thoughts before we do that, though. Mark, let's stay with you for a second. If people want to follow your work, where can they find you? HurricaneTrack.com, been on since 1999. Hurricane, TRACK, HurricaneTrack.com, easy to, Hurricane Track, all one word. Thanks for asking. You bet. And Hal, is there a place people can keep up with what you're doing as well?
Yeah, the GeoTrek website, it's geo-trek.com. We have a weekly podcast there about disasters and resiliency where we're learning a ton of lessons, and also floodinformationsystems.com, and also usurge.net, U-surge, that's the U.S. storm surge database, where we're taking these past lessons and maps and using that to predict a storm surge in the future.
Hey, Tim, Walmart.com.
Thank you for that. I had that written down right here. We appreciate that. Walmart.com. Bill, jump in. Your final thoughts on today and then to talk about next week's show.
Well, yeah, the great thing I got out of listening to everything we're doing here is to how much we've advanced in the science of the forecasting, messaging and the warnings, the coordination now that exists between the private sector and the public entities. It's all necessary stuff because our population is growing much faster along the coast than our road system is to allow people to get out of harm's way. So we need to be better at longer time frames. So it's a very positive message. We're going to continue next week with the preparedness. It's our Greek show. Ari Papadopoulos and Leslie Chapman Henderson, who happens to be Greek, but the married name loses the Greek. I forgot what her last name is. And they're experts on resilience and how to build better, and have been doing it for a long time. And they are our key to the Turn Around, Don't Drown program. They were the sponsors of that when we started it out.
So that'll be next week. And, one of the messages that came out of one of Leslie's programs from Flash, Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, a John Zarella line from one of her videos that says, we have the unique ability to write the ending of our own hurricane story. And I think I've used that over and over again. Now I say, as I always say, I've stolen that. But I think it's so important because by preparing, the more prepared you are, the better the ending of your story is going to be. So, gentlemen, thank you all so much for being with us today. We appreciate your participation and the knowledge that you bring to the program. We sincerely appreciate it and look forward to having you all back on again. Thanks, guys. That wraps up our program for today. We want to thank all of our sponsors who make this a possibility. Of course, USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, Walmart, a part of what we've done with the Storm Science Network for a long time. And Walmart and Lucas, we appreciate what you guys do. The Weather Company, Black Magic Design, the City of Brownsville, the Port of Brownsville, all folks that have been a part of this program today. We appreciate that. It is coming up on 11 o'clock. Time to wrap it up. We'll see you next week for another program, 10 o'clock on Wednesday. Until then, take care. Have a safe week. See you then.